Welcome to True Crime Boss. I'm Jarrett Fentino. We're talking about the prosecution of Luigi Mangione for the December 4th, 2024, it's almost been a year, murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Brian Thompson, CEO, father, and husband. Too many times we forget those other titles that Brian had, and son, and beloved family member, lest we forget. Now what's being litigated in Manhattan are very, very strong, well-argued motions to get the gun, Luigi Mangione's notebook, the ammunition, and his laptop kicked from the prosecution's case. And you may say, how in the blue hell can the defense get these items kicked? We hear the term search warrant all the time. Okay, and when you hear things so commonly, sometimes you lose sight of what they actually are. A search warrant is required in the United States of America for a law enforcement officer to search you, your home, or your vehicle 99.9% of the time, folks. But there are rare and narrow exceptions to a search warrant. Wouldn't you know it? The items that were taken and secured from Luigi Mangione's backpack in Altuna, where he was found 5 days after the murder, were taken without a search warrant. So number one, we have a warrantless search, which means a warrantless search is going to be highly scrutinized by a court when it is objected to by a defense team. And that's exactly what's happening here. So basically, Mangione's lawyers are saying, you secured these items out of the backpack, but you did so in violation of Luigi Mangione's constitutional rights. What say you, prosecution, in response to that? Good luck, right? Well, you heard me just say 99.9% of the time, we need a search warrant. But there are these exceptions. Do any of these exceptions meet this particular search? Let's talk about the response of the prosecution. The motion's been filed. Now the burden shifts back to the prosecution. They're essentially the ones who are required to put up or shut up in response to the motion. They're saying the following. Well, Mangione defense team, here's why we didn't need a warrant. Number one, this was a search incident to a lawful arrest. Okay? They're saying when we arrest someone, we can search the area, the immediate grab area of that person. Why? For officer safety. Now that makes sense. If someone's in a car and they can grab into their console or the area that used to hold an ashtray in a car, that area is subject to search. And that's a good argument. That's an officer safety issue. So what happens? The officers in this case make that argument. But the body cam tells a different story, ladies and gentlemen. Luigi Mangione is handcuffed. He's taken away from the backpack. He couldn't reach that item or anything in there if he wanted to, and he was surrounded by police. You lose the ability to make that argument when an individual is secured in that fashion. That's a problem, and I don't think that argument's going to carry the day. Because when you're looking at an argument like that, you have to assess what they call the totality of the circumstances. And what are the circumstances here? Well, we have it on video. We have an individual removed from that bag and unable to grab it if he wanted to. I don't know that that argument's going to carry the day. So now what? What can the officers say justified an exception to the warrant requirement? They're saying, well, there was a public safety component to this. Luigi Mangione, his actions were terroristic in nature. And that's what he was being called over those 4 days. Somebody capable of shooting a CEO because they're a CEO in the back is certainly capable and likely to have explosives. So they're saying, well, we believe there may have been a bomb in that bag. And wouldn't you know it, on the body cam, one of the officers actually says, checking for explosives. Now, folks, these particular officers may have more experience than me, but anytime I've ever dealt with a SWAT team or a bomb scare, officers aren't just checking bags. They secure a bag or they call in the bomb squad to do it properly. the defense team saying, wait a minute, you're claiming you legitimately believe there was a bomb in there. You didn't even evacuate the McDonald's. You did not take any protocol steps like there was an explosive there. That is not a great fact in response to that argument. So now your public safety exception is not likely going to be the exigent circumstance that carries the day. So where are we at now? The next claim is this was an inventory search. An inventory search is an exception to the warrant requirement because you take an individual into custody and they have a purse or a piece of luggage with them or a backpack with them. And when they're taken, you can't just let somebody take those items into their jail cell, obviously. Those items are collected and they're inventoried. Now, you would inventory an item to make sure there's not $1 million in cash in there, or if there is, it's properly recorded and held. You're inventorying items out of respect for people's personal possessions. So this backpack wasn't being placed into storage, search wasn't being conducted by some inventory. They weren't like notebook, gun, and putting it into inventory. They were searching the backpack. So what do we have now? Then another exception to the warrant requirement is plain view. How do you plain view items through it's not a clear backpack. It was the backpack he was seen carrying. So good luck saying, I saw these items through the backpack. I have x-ray vision. Plain view won't work. Now there's a concept called plain feel. When a particular bag or someone's pockets are examined over the surface and someone with training and experience says, I know what a gun feels like, and it's immediately apparent to me to be the barrel and the handle of a gun. No one's making that argument. So none of these exigent circumstances are looking great in response to the warrantless search. Now, what does this mean? What does it mean if they say, well, prosecutors, you should have got a warrant, okay? It means that Luigi Mangione will stand trial without the alleged murder weapon, without a notebook, what his lawyers are calling a notebook, which the prosecution's calling his manifesto. And in that manifesto, he is said to have stated the following. An insurance executive, that's what I'm looking for. That's perfect. That's got everything. And that's what I'm about, okay? Setting forth his level of intent, setting forth his overall plan to take out an officer, a CEO in the insurance business. If you lose those items, folks, they are damaging to your case. I'm not saying it's the end of the prosecution for Luigi Mangione, but it is a significant hit to the prosecution. Then there's a concept you're going to be hearing called fruit of the poisonous tree. That's biblical. Like, what does that mean? That means that any evidence that was gotten as a result of what you secured in the backpack is fruit of the poisonous search, and that evidence is out. So everything that came literally from the backpack and any evidence that flowed from it is out. Well, you may be saying, well, what could have flowed from that? Well, there was a laptop in that backpack. There was ammunition in that backpack. If the ammunition matches the bullets that were found in Brian's body, don't you think the jury would want to know that? If this search is not upheld, they'll never know that. And what's on the laptop? Luigi Mangione had a break from his family and, quite honestly, society in the months leading up to this murder. His travels, his writings, geospatial information may be contained in that laptop. If this search isn't upheld, guess what? That's all fruit of the poisonous tree. That is the critical importance of what's being litigated in Manhattan this week. Huge, huge consequences for the prosecution and the defense. In addition to the contents of the backpack, we're litigating statements that Mangione may have made. They're saying that he was not properly Mirandized. What does that mean? That means he wasn't read his rights before officers spoke with him. What are your Miranda rights? You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. You have the right, or anything you say can and will be used against you. Okay? They're saying, the defense is saying, the second officers approached Mangione, they should have read him his rights. Now, practically speaking, that doesn't make much sense. You don't just walk up to people and say, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. The way it typically works is they didn't know for sure they had this individual that all of America was looking for in front of them. They tried to ID him. Mangione gave a false name to the officers. That in and of itself is incriminating and helpful to the prosecution's case. So the defense is saying, hey, you didn't Mirandize my guy. He gives you a statement and you're going to use it against him. That's a problem. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think those statements, those identification type statements, he was not in custody, the officers are trying to figure out what the hell they had there, those statements are going to be withheld or upheld, and then he was ultimately Mirandized. What I think is going to happen with the evidence in the backpack, folks, and I know that's the big question. When you look at this, I would have made the argument, in addition to those several exigent circumstance arguments I highlighted, safety, inventory search, search incident to arrest, I'd argue for an inevitable discovery. And what does that mean? That means that backpack would have been transported back to the station with Mangione, and it would have been inventoried, ultimately. The defense is saying there's not a written policy that says that in Altuna. That could hurt their case. That's an important factor judges would consider. I think ultimately there is a path to uphold this search somewhere in the safety concern officers may have had for what was in there, maybe an explosive device, something along those lines, but it ain't great, and it's not a slam dunk. This is going to be very interesting. And it's played out so far today. They had an individual from the New York Police Department that is in their DCPI division that put the images, remember the famous images of Mangione that were out there, this good-looking hooded gunman that was at Starbucks and that was flashed across national news for those couple of days. You know, everybody was checking over their shoulders, this guy here, you know, and that individual was on the stand today, and they're trying to figure out what was in the mind of the folks in McDonald's. What could they have known in those moments when Mangione was there and they observed him? What had been released officially by the investigation that gave them the suspicion that Mangione was the gunman, and ultimately the investigators' probable cause that he was their guy. And they're retelling and recreating that story, which is an important piece of this. Notably, Attorney Anfilio, who is Mangione's lawyer, had a paused screen from Fox News on the screen, and it said there were over 1,000 shootings in New York that year at that particular time. And she asked the witness from the NYPD, did you put a search out with as much fervor for any of those shootings? And immediately struck that question. And it was a shot. It was a shot that Thompson was a CEO, and they were putting extra attention on this individual. You cannot deny the fact that this was a unique shooting, and the fact that this person did this in those early morning hours on camera and took off. I mean, there was something sensational about this case from the jump. And that's really what brought this to the forefront. And the police, they don't control what becomes a national news story, quite honestly. The public was very intrigued by this story. So it I know what she was driving at, but it's not going to carry the day for these proceedings. Also, security for the McDonald's restaurant, individuals were showing the security footage from McDonald's where the employees and some customers believed Mangione was the individual being sought, reported it, and a 911 call went out. But the most interesting witness of the day was a man named Tom Rivers. And Tom Rivers is a corrections officer in the Pennsylvania State Correctional Institute in Huntington. And he was in charge, essentially, of Luigi Mangione for his time there. He was there for 4 months as a pretrial detainee and got to know him. And they talked extensively about Mangione's travels through Thailand and Vietnam. They talked about his attitude toward healthcare and healthcare in other countries. He talked about getting to know Mangione. And one thing that became a big subject of conversation was Rivers kept saying, I don't care about his case. And I think in Filio and the defense were trying to suggest that he didn't care about the shooting or he was somewhat apathetic. I think what Rivers was saying was he wasn't interested in it. He wasn't following it. He just got to know Luigi as a person who was in his custody, which I think helps him as a witness. He's not looking to inject himself into the case that is salacious. So I think that makes him more credible. At least that's what I'd argue. But folks, this is a critical hearing, and these stages of these proceedings lay the groundwork and telegraph exactly what not only is going to happen in the trial, what is allowed to happen in the trial. So at stake here is the smoking gun in the Luigi Mangione prosecution. We're going to continue to follow this case. We're going to keep updating. It's good to be back. And the Luigi Mangione case is the next big thing in the true crime world, folks. We'll be all over it. Thanks.